be a overview of the appropriations process, which is the chief task that we will be delivering on Capitol Hill. And we will do questions and answers at the end, since I'm sure for many of you, or at least some of you, this will be the first time that you have met with Capitol Hill officers with members of the Congress and their staff. So we will open that up at the end. And we hope to be done around 2:45 today. And we will also be recording this. We are recording it. So it will be available for reviewing after we are done. And we will put that up on our website, and we will also email it around to all participants. So I just want to thank all of you for registering for ADEA today, for committing to come to Washington, D.C. You know, it's not a small ask. And for participating today in the webinar. We really appreciate and value your time. We know that you all have busy schedules, and so making this a priority and attending today, and especially coming to Washington, D.C. to advocate is extremely appreciated, and it is by far the biggest and most important thing you can do to influence members of Congress and help advance our mission, which is to secure robust funding for dental, oral, and creative facial research, as well as oral health programs. So with that, I'm just going to kick it over to my colleague Tim at ADEA, the other host for this Advocacy Day, for just a quick opening remark.
Thank you, Yehuda. I'm Tim Leith, the ADEA Chief Advocacy Officer, and I bring you greetings from the chair of our board of directors, Dr. Ana Lopez Fuentes, and Dr. Karen West, our president and CEO. You are the best and most important advocates on this call, because you are from home where the members of Congress live. You're the subject matter experts. Your insight is invaluable. And most importantly, your experience and story make the need real and will make all the difference to the congressional policymakers in understanding the need for and the importance of dental education and dental and craniofacial research. Thank you for your time and commitment, and I'll turn it to Meg.
Actually, I wanted to see if Paige Ballian is on the line. I was going to give her a quick opportunity. She's the chair of the Friends of FNIDCR to just say a quick word.
Yeah, thanks, Yehuda, and thanks, Tim. Hi, everybody. My name is Paige Ballian, and I work at the Association of Maternal and Child Health Programs, and I'm the patient advocate on the AADOCR board, which involves coordinating with the Friends of the FNIDCR. So just wanted to thank you all that are here from the Friends of the FNIDCR today and next week, as well as I see a number of our patient advocates on the line as well. So thank you all for being here. It's really important to share those patient stories on the Hill. So looking forward to today. I'll pass it back to Yehuda.
Thanks so much, Paige. I am now going to turn it over to Megan Riley, who can introduce herself, but she is an invaluable colleague of ours and understands Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill better than both. So I will now send it over to her.
Great, Yehuda, thanks. And I'm going to take a second to get my slides set up here. Starting with slide number 1. This worked when we were testing it, and now it is not, but here we go. Hopefully, if I can get a nod, Yehuda, that you can see the slides properly. Is that good? Great. Thanks, everyone. All right. Well, thank you all. I'm really happy to be joining AADOCR, Friends of FNIDCR, and ADEA for this Hill Day. As our opening speaker said, this is a really important opportunity to influence lawmakers and help ensure that they make dental research and oral health programs a priority in this Congress. As you could have said, I work with CRD Associates and help support the legislative work of the organization. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what you'll be walking into next week when you're here in DC and how you can prepare to make the most of these meetings. So let's start with just the basics. Let's talk a little bit about Congress. I know some of you are beginner advocates, and that's okay. Any level of experience is really welcome up on the Hill, but it's great to have kind of an overview of what happens over here in Washington. So we have, of course, the House and the Senate. The Senate is known as the upper chamber. It has 100 senators representing the 50 states. Each state has 2 senators, and a senator's role in Congress is to represent their entire state from the largest cities to the most far-flung rural areas across that entire area. Senators come up for election every 6 years on a staggered basis. So about a third of the Senate will be up for election in each election year. In the House, there are 435 members, and those are voting members, and then 6 non-voting delegates, which represent the territories. And of course, us here living in Washington, D.C., we have a non-voting member as well. House members represent geographical districts of states based on population. So they may skew in a certain demographic direction. Perhaps a member represents a suburban area, perhaps they represent a really rural region, or they could represent, parts of certain cities. There can be large cities have many members representing them across the whole area. Every seat in the House faces an election every 2 years, so there can be quite a bit of turnover in the House of Representatives. And then in both chambers, the House and Senate members are divided into committees, which have jurisdiction over particular areas of government. So we'll talk about some of those committees. The Appropriations Committee in particular is very important as they make funding decisions across all federal departments and agencies. Other committees that oversee health work include the House Energy and Commerce Committee, the House Ways and Means Committee, the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and the Senate Finance Committee. And let's talk a bit about the legislative process, how a bill becomes a law. Some of you probably remember Bill here from your childhood, if he taught you, the basic schoolhouse rock about how a bill becomes a law. But let's just go over the basics. A bill is introduced in Congress. It's then referred to a relevant subcommittee or of a committee. So one of those committees I just mentioned, or somewhere else, depending on the topic. The subcommittees will hold hearings to kind of learn from stakeholders, learn from federal officials about the impact of the bill, those who are for it or those who are against it. And after hearings would ideally hold a markup. A markup is a meeting of the subcommittee in which members can debate the merits of the bill, offer amendments, make changes before they move it up to the full committee. And then that happens at the full committee level. And the full committee, they can change and amend the bill, and then they would, if they approve it, send it to the floor of the House or Senate. So the House and Senate do this process separately. They'll bring a bill to the floor and they'll pass it. Rarely will that happen kind of identically. The House may pass one version of a bill, the Senate may have different priorities, they pass something else. In that case, they'll go to a conference committee, which is where the House and the Senate together hash out their differences. They come up with the final version of the bill, which is called a conference report. And that goes to the president for signature. So that's how it goes. That's the schoolhouse rock version of how a bill becomes a law. But in practice, things don't happen that way too often. Committee work can be skipped. Bills can be packaged together in sort of an omnibus or like a multi-bill vehicle. Sometimes there's no opportunity for amendments or amendments aren't allowed. The House could pass a bill that the Senate has already passed, kind of eliminating the need for things like a conference committee. Things can kind of go off course in a lot of different ways, but the bottom line is that in every case for a bill to become a law, the House and Senate must pass identical versions of the legislation, and then the president must sign it. There are 2 different types of legislation. So really everything that Congress does falls under one of these 2 umbrellas, authorizing legislation and appropriations legislation. Authorizing legislation creates, expands, or changes federal policies and programs, or alters government functions and responsibilities. Authorizing can also refer to the providing authorization to spend federal money on a program or initiative, but remember, authorizing money does not mean money is spent. For that, you do need appropriation. When we talk about appropriations, we're talking about Congress's quote unquote power of the purse, which they exercise through this process. Appropriations legislation provides budget authority to federal departments and agencies and specifically allocates federal spending to programs. The appropriations process occurs every year with the fiscal year beginning on October 1st. So to get a little deeper into the appropriations process and timeline, this slide shows a little map of exactly how, again, it's supposed to work. So under the process as it's laid out, the president would release a budget in February. That budget is more of a proposal or a request than it is a true, active budget. Congress can use it, they'll consider it as they approach the appropriations process, but there's no binding authority in the president's budget. Then the congressional budget committees start with their budget resolutions in the spring. And those resolutions establish an overall discretionary spending level for the coming fiscal year. After the budget committee, it goes down to the appropriations committees in each chamber, and they use that overall allocation and divide it amongst 12 appropriations subcommittees and determine how much money each of those subcommittees will have to do their work for the coming fiscal year. Now, one of those subcommittees is the Labor, Health and Human Services and Education Subcommittee, which oversees things like biomedical research, oral health training programs, and some of the stuff you'll be talking about when you're here in DC. So once those subcommittees have their allocations, they can begin their work, writing a bill, bringing it to subcommittee markup, bringing it to a full committee markup and onto the floor, just like we talked about with the general legislative process. And then ideally, both the House and Senate will have passed all their appropriations bills by the summer. They can conference them out, and then the president will sign them by September 30th, which is the end of the fiscal year. Now, what I just described would be a monumental success for Congress. They typically, and I didn't look this up beforehand, but this does not happen, that all 12 appropriations bills would be passed by Congress and signed by the president, ready for the beginning of the fiscal year on October 1st. A lot of times they can't finish, let alone a whole funding panel, but even individual bills going through the appropriations process. So rarely, if ever, does that happen. When Congress can't pass all their appropriations bills by the end of the fiscal year, they often have to resort to something called a continuing resolution, or a CR. And CR is a mechanism for Congress to keep the government open, continue federal funding at the same level as the previous fiscal year, and continue to work on their funding bills for the fiscal year that has basically already started on October 1st. So the current fiscal year we're in right now is fiscal year 2023. It began on October 1st, 2022, but Congress didn't pass a funding bill for this fiscal year until late in December. And in the interim, the government stayed open under continuing resolutions. And where we stand right now in the fiscal year 2024 process is that President Biden released his budget proposal for fiscal year 2024 a few weeks ago on March 9th. Thinking back to a couple minutes ago, I did mention that that should happen in February. So that was a bit of a delay this year. The committees organizing in this new Congress also got off to a slow start. So the appropriations timeline has been both delayed and rushed. But the good news is we are here at a very important time while appropriators collect kind of priorities from across Congress, from stakeholders. They want to hear from advocates. So right now is a great time in both the House and Senate for you to come in and share why, among all of the many competing priorities in the federal government, and why in this very tight budget climate, it's important to invest in dental research and oral health programs and how critical that funding is. So your job will be to help make that case when you're here in DC, and hopefully this overview helps you understand a bit about the context when you go into doing that. So let's talk a little bit about the outlook for the 118th Congress right now. That convened in January, and at the time after the 2022 election, Democrats maintained the majority in the Senate with 51 seats, and that includes 3 independent senators, but they choose to caucus with the Democrats, giving the Democrats the edge there. But 51 to 49 is a very close margin there in the Senate, especially we've seen in recent weeks and months, senators being absent for injuries and hospitalizations, and that will have an impact on, the floor schedule in the Senate and how they can consider policies. The other thing to remember about the Senate is that for most things to move forward, you need 60 votes to advance. So even with maybe a partisan divide, there is an absolute need for bipartisan cooperation in the Senate. In the House, Republicans have taken over the majority, and they have about a 5-seat swing over the Democrats who were previously in the majority. But that's not a lot of wiggle room, especially when you think about the vast priority differences across the span of the Republican conference. Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who was elected Speaker after what I'm sure many of you saw on the news was a tense week of negotiation and 15 eventual Speaker votes on the House floor, unprecedented in modern history, really had to make some concessions to the conservative wing of this party in order to succeed in that vote. So for him to keep that whole party together without losing a small number of votes in order to pass things on the floor is going to be really pretty difficult. So another thing that when we're talking about Speaker McCarthy and keeping the Republican wing of the party together, to gain that speakership, it's been reported that he agreed with his party to cut spending back to fiscal year 2022 levels. So right now we're in fiscal year 2023. So that would mean cutting spending back to the previous fiscal year, which could be really damaging. And especially if you consider that a Republican priority is likely to be to protect defense spending, to protect veteran spending from these type of cuts, that leaves less money overall to invest in other non-defense discretionary programs like biomedical research and oral health programs. So what we may see coming out of the House later in the appropriations process is a labor, HHS, and education bill that deprioritizes health programs. Whether that can make it through the House floor, though, is very much in question. And then we have the Senate, and I would characterize the Senate very differently. They are not seeking to make this type of drastic cut. They want to move their bills through regular order, listen to priorities, make investments where needed. But again, both the House and Senate need to agree on what they put in these funding bills. And if they don't, we're facing a CR, a potential series of CRs, and possibly a government shutdown is also at risk. This is not the most sunny outlook for you coming in on your trip to DC, but I think the underlying thing here is that your voice is very important and your advocacy really matters. There's a lot of important federal programs at risk in an environment like this, and legislators need to hear from you. I think it was Tim who said it. You're bringing the message from back home, and what these members of Congress consider most important is how their policies affect people back in their states and districts. So it's very important that you're coming to DC and that you're having these conversations. And I think I can end with it's a cliche in Washington, but perhaps this group isn't familiar with it, when we say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, which means if you're not here to advocate for your priorities, those are the programs that are going to get sliced up and cut when Congress is looking to make those cuts. So despite maybe a little bit of fractious climate here in Congress, I will say that your voices are very important, and we look forward to having you in DC next week to talk about these important issues. Answer anything that does come up, or Tim can perhaps start his presentation.
Okay, doesn't look like there are any. Sorry to interrupt, and back to you, Tim.
That's fine.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fox. I'll share my screen and we'll talk a little bit about the oral health training programs at HRSA. And I'm hoping that that slide is visible to everyone at this point.
Looks great, thanks.
Good. We'll this is a little bit about ADEA, and you can see that the American Dental Education Association is the voice of dental education, and on March 30th, you will be that voice. What we're going to ask the members of Congress to do is to request that the appropriations committees provide $46 million for the oral health training programs in the Health Resources and Services Administration at HHS. These programs provide for both pre-doctoral programs and training in general, pediatric, and public health dentistry and dental hygiene. The postdoctoral training in general and pediatric dentistry. Within that 46 million, we're asking them to set aside $14 million for each of general dentistry residencies and pediatric dentistry residencies. In the current fiscal year, the total appropriation was 42.7 million, and there was a set aside $15 million for that. Are you back? I'll move on. Then the dental faculty loan repayment program, which is about $2 million of the $46 million, makes grants to hygiene programs and dental schools to provide for loan repayment to their faculty members for various faculty development activities that they engage in. I'll give you a little additional detail on each of these areas. That according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the demand for dentists is projected to grow 6% between 2021 and 2031. And for dental hygienists, the demand will grow by 9% in that same period. When I last checked, we're graduating just about enough dentists to fill the chairs of the retiring dentists each year. We graduate about 6,600 dentists. And you can see that in academic year 2021-2022, the pre-doctoral portion of the oral health training programs provided funds to train a little over 7,000 dental and hygiene students, and that about a little over 1,800 of those passed or completed their programs. Moving to the postdoctoral training programs, I should say. This slide and this information demonstrates that the federal investment in advancing advanced training is increasing the number of dental professionals in the areas where they are most in need and where there are dental shortage areas. As you can see, of those who completed their training last in 2021-2022, 79% reported that they were working in primary care settings, and 35% were working in medically underserved communities. The dental faculty loan repayment program provides, we require additional faculty to provide the high quality oral health practitioners for the country, and require provides for the need for future dentists, hygienists, dental therapists. And this slide shows that the investment of the graduates to pursue an academic career and still pay off their debts. As you can see, there's not a lot of those that participate or are able to participate, but we want to maintain what we have and increase it going forward. And you can see that the recipients are targeted where we want them targeted. 39% are from underrepresented minorities, 29% are from disadvantaged backgrounds, and 15% are from rural areas. And with that, I'll turn it back to Yehuda and stop sharing my screen, and hopefully
Can you hear me? Can anyone hear me?
we can hear you now.
We can hear you.
All right, great. Thumbs, fantastic. Okay, sorry about that. Let me put the presentation back up. Okay. Okay, how does that look for everyone? Are we good? All right, okay. Thank you very much, Tim. Hopefully my audio doesn't cut out again. If it does, you should be able to unmute yourself and scream at me. Okay. My name is Yehuda Sugarman. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the American Association for Dental, Oral, and Craniofacial Research. On Capitol Hill, you can say the whole name, but we also use the acronym AADOCR if you're not already one of our members. So, you know, at Advocacy Day, you will be representing AADOCR, ADEA, as well as the Friends of NIDCR. So the three groups are the hosts, and you may be associated with one or none of those organizations, but that's who you are representing. So one of the things to know on the 30th when you're on the Hill is to stay on message and focus on the asks that we are training you on, and on the talking points that we give you, and on our specific asks that we will be reviewing today. If you have other issues or other concerns, even if they are within the dental and oral health bucket of policy issues, please refrain from advocating for those things on the 30th, as we need to have a unified message on Capitol Hill. So one of the things to keep in mind underlying this whole advocacy day is that members of Congress are generally, especially in this political and partisan environment, looking to cut or terminate programs that don't have a specific vocal base of constituent support. And they want to hear from their constituents. Their job is to hear from the people that they represent about the programs that are most important to them. So our organization, our three organizations, champion the work of NIDCR and of HRSA. We do it year round, but you are the ones who are going to have the greatest impact, not us as, you know, lobbyists or advocates in Washington, D.C., but it's going to be you, the constituents that they not only want to hear from, but are really required to listen to as the elected leaders of your district and state. So let me just give a quick overview of our organization, the American Association for Dental, Oral, and Craniofacial Research. It's a nonprofit organization that has more than 3,000 members nationwide. Our mission is to advance research and increase knowledge for the improvement of oral health. It is to support and represent the oral health research community, and to facilitate the communication and application of research findings. At the beginning of your meetings, it will be important to take a deep breath and introduce yourself and the organizations that you represent, and talk about where you are from and the institution or school that you're associated with, and then briefly what you do. That'll get the meeting off the ground and get it going, or relieve some nerves. So you can talk about what, you know, the institution or the school where you do research, where you're a student, and what your focus is. Really that kind of first 30-second to 1 minute introduction of yourself and the organizations. And if you forget about, you know, the organization that you are representing, that's okay. It will be on the asks sheet that we are leaving behind with member offices. And Tim already covered ADEA, so I'm going to also cover the Friends of NIDCR. It is a coalition of academic and research institutions, professional associations, foundations that champion NIDCR. The consortium comes from varying backgrounds within academia, and specifically patient advocate groups, who will be represented on Capitol Hill on March 30th. And the coalition helps represent the interests of patients, researchers, educators, clinicians, and students, because they all have some connection to NIDCR and the work and the mission of that institute and the critical research that they do. So let's jump into our Advocacy Day asks. And there are 3 key asks that we will be delivering on Capitol Hill on March 30th. First, continue building upon scientific progress by providing robust federal funding for the entire health research enterprise, which includes NIDCR, NIH, and all the federal health agencies that demonstrate the promise of research. So you may wonder why we're talking about NIH, because we are going to talk about that a lot. The NIDCR is obviously one of the 27 institutes and centers under the NIH, and we will talk a little bit about the specific allocation that NIDCR gets. But without a robust appropriation for NIH, NIDCR will be impacted and will be limited in terms of how much money it can be allocated. There is a percentage that each institute gets, obviously, and range, and it will, if the NIH is, for example, flat funded, which I don't think it will be, but it's possible, the NIDCR will be flat funded. If the NIH gets, a 10% increase, which is extremely unlikely, then NIDCR will hopefully get about a 10% increase. But we're going to talk about that proportion a little bit later on. One thing to keep in mind is when you're delivering these asks, you have to actually say those words. We are here to ask your boss. Usually you'll be meeting with congressional staff. If you're meeting with a member, you can say, I'm here to ask you to do the following. You have to actually say those words, and you can say them twice. We're asking you to do this. Most of the offices you're going to meet with are going to indicate that they support NIH and medical research. We are lucky to be advocating for an issue that is extremely popular and that has decades of bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. But we cannot be complacent. And given, again, the fiscal environment, we need to make sure that we are advocating for the highest possible allocation in fiscal year 2024 for the NIH and NIDCR. And you need to communicate the critical role that the NIH plays in spurring discoveries that are saving lives, that are laying the foundation for new treatments and therapies that are helping the country address public health needs. It is essential for this federal support to continue in order for the NIH to have the resources that it needs and to ensure that our nation remains at the forefront of medical research. Our Advocacy Day ask number 2 is HRSA's Title VII oral health training programs, which Tim talked about. But this is, I just want to reiterate, this is the ask of increasing access to high quality dental health services, specifically in rural and underserved communities, by providing robust federal funding for HRSA's Title VII oral health training programs. The key thing here, remember, is that HRSA has a number of different programs that they administer, and we are focused on the oral health training programs that Tim talked about. They help alleviate supply shortages. They improve the placement of providers in underserved areas. They improve the racial and ethnic diversity of providers, and it helps the agency helps accomplish that goal by supporting and developing education and training programs in general, pediatric, and public health dentistry. And I apologize if I'm repeating some of the material that Tim delivered already, but I think that's okay. And these programs provide student financial assistance, traineeship, mentorship, faculty development, pre- and postdoctoral training, as well as the establishment or operation of a faculty loan repayment program. The programs are available to dental professionals at various stages of their career, including licensed dentists, dental assistants, and dental hygienists. Our third ask is a standalone piece of legislation called the Resident Education Deferred Interest Act, or REDI Act. You may have heard of this. It is a it is a piece of legislation that would provide a pause on student loan interest accrual, as well as a pause on principal loan repayment for medical and dental students while they are in their residencies or internships. It does not wipe out their student debt. It does not provide forgiveness. This is simply a measure to help students and residents afford their loans and pay them back and not be burdened by the debt while they are still in medical or dental school. It will save these students thousands of dollars in interest. It will also help address the workforce issues that are facing dentistry today. This is a bill that has the support of AADOCR, of ADEA, and the Friends of FNIDCR. It also has pretty good bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. And it's also relevant and good timing for us to be delivering our ask on the READY Act, because it was just reintroduced in Congress this month by Representatives Brian Babin, who's from Texas, who's a dentist, a Republican from Texas, Chrissy Houlihan, who's a Democrat from Pennsylvania, and was introduced in the Senate by Senators Jackie Rosen from Nevada, a Democrat, and John Bozeman, a Republican from Arkansas. So we will get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. Here is a chart of where the NIH and NIDCR have been over the last 5 or 6 years in terms of federal funding. So you can see that figures have increased year to year, and that is in large part due to not only strong bipartisan support, but also the really incredible coalition of support that exists for medical research across medical and dental professions. And the advocacy that we're doing is one piece of that. So you can see last year in the enacted omnibus, NIH received $47.46 billion, and NIDCR received about a little over $520 million. Our request for fiscal year 2024 is $5.92 billion. It's okay if you say 51. In some places you'll see the 51. In some places you'll see the 50.9. It's okay to ask for either of those. And the $558 million. And those figures are aligned at exactly a 7.3% increase over fiscal year 2023. We don't have to memorize these figures. They'll be on your ask sheet. They'll be on your talking point sheet that you'll have available to you. But it is reflective of the unified ask within the medical research community that we have all aligned on. So if they ask, why 51 billion for NIH, that is a figure that a number of large coalition groups, Research America, AADOCR Group for Medical Research, you don't really need to know the names of them, but there are large coalitions that have all unified around those figures, and the NIDCR figure is the same percentage because we want a proportional increase for NIDCR as NIH. And last year, the omnibus included $42.67 million for FERS's Title VII oral health programs. So the budget proposal, this is only relevant in the sense that it is the first step in the process of developing a appropriations package and budget for fiscal year 2024, as Megan covered. And so it is the first figures that we are seeing for 2024. By no means will Congress follow the budget proposal. It's simply a blueprint and the priorities of the administration. And so we'll talk about that. But the budget was released on March 9th, as Megan mentioned, and included $48.3 billion for NIH, and it included $520.16 million for NIDCR, $42.67 million for HRSA. And the NIH figure, this is for the base budget, is a very small increase that is being recommended by the administration. It is only a 1.7% increase over 2023. The reason why it is small, from what we understand, is that the administration included additional funding under 21st Century Cures legislation. You may hear a reference to that. It also includes a large increase for ARPA-H, which many of you are familiar with. the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. And the idea for the cancer moonshot. So the idea, I think, of the administration is that if we increase all these other buckets of funding for medical research, then NIH doesn't need quite as large of a increase. We strongly disagree, and so does the rest of the medical research community. We think the base budget for NIH is extremely important. That is what will allow the current programs and initiatives that are undergoing to continue to expand. And while those other programs are great and we support them wholeheartedly, it cannot come at the expense of the base budget of the NIH. So that's why we are asking for a much higher increase than the president requested in his budget proposal earlier this month. And ultimately, Congress does make the final budget decision. So that's why we are going to be talking to Congress about what figures we specifically want. And as you can see with I'll just finish on this slide, NIDCR and HRSA's flat funding, that is something that we are specifically concerned about because it does not represent the needs of those two agencies. Okay, so let's get a little bit deeper into the NIH and NIDCR requests. And all of this information will be on your talking points document, which will be available on our website and in your packets and folders that you'll have with you on Capitol Hill. So just as a background, there have been a number of surveys over the years of Americans and how they feel about medical research. 8 in 10 Americans in a survey from last year said that investing in research is important to economic growth and creating jobs. It's a priority. Americans believe that the U.S. It is important for the U.S. to be a global leader in health research specifically. They also recognize the importance of health research on a global scale. 2/3 of Americans agree that the federal government should invest in preventing and curing diseases wherever they occur, and that we should be a global leader. As the world's premier public funder of medical research, the NIH plays a critical role in our international leadership. And so annual growth for NIH is not only important for people's health, but also to maintaining our competitiveness in the global economy. And by expanding the NIH's capacity through robust funding, it will allow the U.S. to make tangible progress against a wide range of diseases and conditions that are facing our country. It is also important to recognize that biomedical research inflation is much higher than ordinary inflation, which is already very high, as you know. So the Biomedical Research and Development Price Index, or BRDPI, is what we are comparing our funding request to, and so that's why we need a meaningful growth and increase of at least 5% in 2024. Then NIDCR. It is the largest institution in the world exclusively dedicated to researching ways to improve dental, oral, and craniofacial research. Many of you have been involved in research grants from the NIDCR, and so you're familiar with it. But for those who are not, NIDCR supports scientists at all stages of their careers, from as young as high school students to independent researchers. It funds cutting-edge, basic, translational, and clinical research to create the foundation of science for oral health policy and practice. Then NIDCR shares research findings and health information with the public, healthcare professionals, researchers, and policymakers to promote oral health. Its investments are showing promise in many areas that impact dental and craniofacial complex, the dental craniofacial complex, and the overall health of Americans. Some of those areas are specifically pain biology and management, reducing opioid use, TMD, regenerative medicine, developing early diagnostics, and assessing the HPV vaccine efficacy for oral and pharyngeal cancers. In recent years, the federal government's investment in NIDCR has not kept up with biomedical inflation, nor has it kept up with the overall increases for NIH. Despite all of its scientific accomplishments. And this is what I was referring to earlier when I say we need a proportional increase. Over the last several years, the NIH's increase has superseded the NIDCR increase. And so that is part of our messaging on March 30th, that Congress needs to ensure that the allocation for NIDCR is proportional to whatever NIH receives. If NIH gets a 3% increase, for example, NIDCR needs a 3% increase. And you can even see in the president's budget, it did not keep up with the overall NIH increase based on his request. You'll have various resources to refer to talk about NIH and NIDCR. There will be a talking points document. There is a highlights sheet. This will be on the website. It will be in your packets. It provides a number of different examples for what NIDCR has been invested in, what sort of research it's doing and supporting at universities and dental schools, and some of its key initiatives of late. So, and the figure that we're requesting, finally, it represents the actual needs of the dental research community. It's not just a number thrown out there. It is what we understand the agency needs to support its current programs. Okay, the READY Act. Our third ask, as I mentioned, and the reason I want to skip from 1 to 2 is that our second ask is the HRSA Title VII, which Tim covered. The third ask is regarding this READY Act, and we're asking Congress to co-sponsor the bill. There's only a few co-sponsors of each of the bill in the House and the Senate. So you can ask the members and their staff that you meet with on next Thursday to co-sponsor the legislation. That will mean adding their name as a as one of the authors or supporters of the bill, and to support it when it comes forward, hopefully, and advances to a full vote in the House and Senate. This bill allows borrowers to qualify for interest-free deferment on their student loans. As I mentioned earlier, it addresses the dental workforce issue by making dental education more affordable. And as I mentioned as well, it doesn't provide any loan forgiveness or reduce a borrower's original loan balance. So some of the things you want to talk about when mentioning this bill is that the cost of graduate level medical and dental education is extremely high. It's very substantial and challenging for the majority of students. Those who undertake many years of residency, as I don't need to tell most of you, receive very little pay. They're unable to begin repaying their debt right away. It takes years, and so they as a result they qualify to have their payments halted during residency through deferment or forbearance processes, but they continue to accrue interest that is added to their balance. The READY Act will prevent physicians and dentists from being penalized during residency by precluding the government from charging them interest on their loans at this time. And then, the workforce issue, according to a recent report from HRSA in 2022, across all physician specialties, there's a projected shortage of about 81,000 full-time physicians, or there will be in 2035. And so that the demand for general dentists is predicted to exceed supply by 2030. So this legislation will help address that workforce shortage, and it will encourage medical and dental students to pursue their careers in medicine and in dentistry, and hopefully open up practices in underserved areas where it is more, to make it more attractive and affordable for residents to practice there. And I'm almost finished, and then we'll go to questions. I just have one last slide. The advocacy leave behind folders, these will be handed to you on the 29th at the legislative briefing. They will be handed to you on March 30th at the breakfast in Washington, D.C. And these are the folders that we will be handing to congressional staff that you're meeting with on Capitol Hill. It will include the organizational asks. It will include a unified letter that AADOCR, ADEA, the pediatric dentists, and ADA have all drafted one combined letter, which includes all of our appropriations asks. There'll be a fact sheet on both HRSA and NIDCR, and there will be a letter that has been circulating in Congress on the READY Act. And so you'll have all of those to hand to congressional offices, and we will also have folders that will include a number of some of these materials, as well as other talking points that you can refer to help prepare you for your meetings. So with that, and here's the information. I'm just going to leave this on the board, this screen up for a few minutes. But this is the contact information for myself and Tim and Megan. If you have any questions, come up either now or on Advocacy Day. And Bodhi, I'm going to go to you. Let me see if you can just unmute your line.
Thank you, Yehuda, and thanks to Tim and Megan for their overviews as well. This has been extremely helpful. Just a point of clarification on the READY Act regarding eligibility, because it says internships and residencies. So does that also cover dental graduates who go into a specialty training program that is not covered, say, by GME? So they're going into perio or endo and they're paying tuition often as a student. Is the deferment cover those individuals as well, or is it only if it's a bona fide residency or internship with that language, like an AEGD program or a GPR program for dentists?
I'm actually not sure myself the eligibility requirements within the legislation, and I'm not even sure that it gets into that level of detail. So I'll have to check into that. I don't know if Tim or Megan know the answer to that, but otherwise I can look into that eligibility.
To be honest, off the top of my head, it's been at least a year since I've looked at that bill, and I'll need to look at the one that they've introduced. We'll look at that and we'll share an answer with you and be prepared to let everybody else know, I think next week when we all get together. That's a very good question. My recollection is that it would be all right, but need to look at the bill itself.
Yeah, I just recall a number of years ago, and some of you who are maybe a little more gray than others on the call, when HRSA opened up GME funding, we assumed for all specialty programs, and we applied for it and we got money, and then we were told no, it wasn't for that, and we had to give the money back or whatever. I remember that back when I was at Rutgers on the faculty. So just want to be clear as we're communicating this to those that are either coming into, if this passes, coming into our programs or about to graduate, whether they are eligible or not. So thanks, Tim. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Amit, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much. I know the focus on FNIDCR and HRSA, but I think we should start to focus on all agencies that have agenda related to health. So, for example, the CMS and Medicaid and Medicare will support dental education significantly through the provision of care for Medicaid and Medicare patients. USAID has health but does not have oral health. My point is that some agencies think that just by saying health, that is it. Dentistry is not included. So they separate between dentistry and health. And I think we have to take a position that anywhere in any legislation health is mentioned, we should put a slash or a parenthesis, including oral health. And that's important really for funding. It could increase the funding without adding more money, but by making us competitive with other agencies.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I would just respond that we do have additional requests that we are delivering in the letter that I mentioned from the dental community. That dental community letter actually includes a number of different programs under HRSA that relate to oral health. Tim knows more about those, as well as the CDC's Division of Oral Health, as well as some additional programs that specifically relate to either dental oral research or oral health care and access to care as well. So that is in there. We're only focusing on these requests for the purposes of the congressional meetings, where we'll have about 15 minutes and multiple participants generally about that amount of time to deliver our message. So we're just focusing on really the top level items within the meetings, but we are delivering those asks as well in writing.
That's exactly right. You hit it, and Dr. Smith. I appreciate that, and I don't want to leave the impression that these are the only things that we think about, and ADEA is a member of a number of coalitions, including a partnership for Medicaid, and we spend a lot of time on Medicaid issues. What we're focusing on for a Hill Day on sort of what's hot and what's happening right now. There isn't any Medicaid proposal or legislation that we could point to and say this is must pass or must not pass. And we spend a good bit of time on a number of other programs, even at HRSA, the HCOP program and the AHEC program and some other things. But appropriations is sort of what's happening now, and we want to highlight that as the members are they're having hearings, and it's top of mind for them.
And we have about 15 minutes left, and Megan has some additional slides that she is going to share on meeting tips and tricks and the structure of meeting, how to tell your story. So I am going to turn it back over to her.
Great, thanks, Yehuda. Let me just get my slides up again.
And we'll have time for additional questions at the end of her presentation.
All right, thanks everyone. Thanks, Yehuda. We're just going to go a little bit. Oops, my slideshow went back to the beginning. We're going to talk a little bit about how you will run these meetings on the Hill next week. I think we do have a cross section of experienced advocates and some newer advocates, so this might be a bit of a refresher for you, but that's always helpful. Or maybe if this is your first time, a chance to dive in and really understand what you'll be doing next week. So again, Congress is our federal lawmaking body, and that's where the action happens in DC. They're even constitutionally obligated to complete the appropriations process and fund our federal government. And the way they make those decisions is to find out how it's going to impact the folks back home. I think every one of the speakers today has mentioned this. They want to know what their decisions mean back home in their communities and to their constituents. They make these funding decisions line by line. The Appropriations Committee really does see everything that's funded in the federal government. But in order to do that, they have to know what the stakeholders think, what the money is going to, what the impact is of research or training programs, how it helps their state and district. So whether you're an experienced advocate or you're a newcomer, you are the subject matter expert when it comes to your own experience in dental education or in dental research, and that makes you an invaluable advocate up on the Hill. So please come to DC and tell your representatives and their staff your own story. Tell them why investment in dental research is critical. Tell them what you're doing in research and why it's making a difference. Tell them what dental education means to you, what your story is, and how you've come up through the ranks. And the more you can make a connection between what the funding decisions that Washington makes and the programs that you do at your own institutions or in the communities the legislators represent, the more real these programs come for the members of Congress. And then the more difficult it is for them to say, hey, I want to cut that funding. And instead, hopefully they'll say, that's something that needs additional investment. That's something I want to prioritize. So make sure you're sharing your personal story and your personal experience. That really brings it home for members and staff. Just to get prepared for your meetings, whether it's your first time or you've done this many, many times, it's always helpful to do some preliminary research about the legislators' priorities before you arrive for your meeting. So once you get your schedule next week and you know who you're meeting with, take a moment when you have one to visit the official websites and learn where these members of Congress that you're visiting stand on issues, whether they've made mention of biomedical research or dental research or health training. You can scan press releases or take a look at their social media. Just see what they're up to and what their priorities are, what opinions they're voicing. If you don't see anything when you do this search, that can be anything relevant, that can be educational as well, because maybe that means there's room for this member to be kind of conditioned as a champion for oral health. Maybe they're looking for something to stand out on. Maybe you're meeting with a freshman member of Congress who hasn't quite figured out their priorities yet, but you come in and you're a constituent, you get in the door and you teach them about these issues, and maybe they'll be a supporter and be in Congress for a long time and you've developed a champion. Also take a look at what committees your legislators are on. For instance, we talked a lot about the Appropriations Committee. If they're a member there, they have a lot more say over what goes into the funding decision. So that's important. Make sure, again, Yehuda spoke to this, but I'll emphasize it, you familiarize yourself with the materials that the groups will be making available to you. There will be talking points and some backgrounders that will be up on AADOCR's website and that you'll receive upon your travels. You don't need to use these talking points as a script, but they can really highlight some of the important areas for you and help you kind of add data to your own personal story. So again, most important is your personal story, but please be prepared with the talking points and the asks as well to have a successful meeting. Here's sort of a bit about how a meeting will take place. A lot of times, and I would say the majority of times, some of you will be lucky to get the opportunity to meet your senator or representative, but for the most part, you will be meeting with congressional staff. Congressional staff are so important. You know, it's not a slight by the member at all to have a meeting with staff. Congressional staff are trusted advisors. They're the gatekeepers to their bosses. You have to get past them, really, to get the priority in front of the member of Congress. So meeting with a member of a congressional staff is a great opportunity, and they're a great resource. So not only, you know, treat them with respect and really do well in these meetings, but try and develop and maintain a relationship with them going forward as you kind of continue to advocate for your positions with your legislators. So basically a meeting, as you had said, will probably be about 15 to 30 minutes. So time is of the essence. Make sure you're concise and follow kind of the steps and get in there most efficiently. But yeah, introduce yourself, talk about where you're from, your institution, particularly if you're a constituent. You may not be a constituent in every meeting, but if you are, please identify yourself as one. Introduce and describe the organizations that you're here representing. Yehuda and Tim gave some overview of what these organizations do and stand for. You might already be really familiar with one and not the others. You'll be in groups for these meetings, so maybe there'll be a mix of folks who are familiar with each organization, but make sure you introduce the organizations and talk about why we're up on the Hill. Before you jump right into the asks, though they are very important, again, I can't emphasize this enough, frame your request around your personal story and experience. Members of Congress and their staff can look up what these federal programs do and what they were funded at, but they can't look up how it's affecting you as a constituent. So frame that, and then move to the asks and share why they're important. Keep your remarks concise and make sure all meeting participants can contribute. You will be in groups. Some groups might be pretty large, especially if you're, you know, in a Senate meeting for a particularly big state. That might be a meeting in which not everyone can share their whole personal story. Maybe not everyone's able to deliver one of the asks, but try and make sure everyone can introduce themselves, their institution, and a bit about themselves to make it a well-rounded meeting. The best meetings are two ways. You know, you don't want to go in and lecture the staff, but really welcome their questions and dialogue, their comments. You can learn a lot from what staff say in these meetings about a member's position or how likely they are to support an initiative, even if they don't come right out and say yes or no. They'll talk about clues, they'll talk about their boss's position on various things, and we want to welcome that. If you are asked a question and you don't know the answer, just make a note of it and promise to follow up. AADOCR, ADEA, staff can help you make that follow up after the meeting's over and make sure we get the office the information and resources that they need. And do follow up. You can get a business card, an email address, make sure you send a thank you note. If you can build relationships with congressional staff out of this, that's great. And you can continue that advocacy throughout the year. So again, you will be split up into groups. So, no one, for the most part, will be traveling around the Hill by themselves. You'll be in good company. We're selecting some mostly experienced advocates to serve as group leaders, which is a pretty important function. So what we have some tips on the slide to make your group leader experience a success. We'll all be meeting on Wednesday at the Hill briefing on March 29th. And at that point, you'll find out who's in your group. So try and find your group, get to know each other, get started talking about how you want the meetings to go. On the day of the advocacy day, when we meet for breakfast, gather with your group, make a plan to go up to the Hill together for your first meeting. And as the group leader, you're really going to be the glue, the cohesive unit that keeps the group together. Be the one to make sure that the meeting covers the necessary topics and asks. Convene everyone to select an order for the ask delivery and designate different participants to do that. If the meeting goes off topic, and it might do that, that's okay. Bring it back. Bring it back to dental research, bring it back to oral health and dental training. Keep an eye on the clock, make sure you don't run over time without getting a chance to make the ask, and then make that offer to follow up with staff and then send a thank you note. We definitely encourage everyone to send a thank you note, but I really emphasize that the group leaders should at least get that done. Here's some meeting logistics when you're up on the Hill. First of all, dress professionally, of course, and I would recommend that you wear comfortable shoes. There's marble floors throughout the Capitol campus, and they're really unforgiving, and you might be walking a lot and even going from the House side back to the Senate side and the reverse. Wearing a white coat is an option. I think there was actually a photo on one of the previous slides from a previous Hill day. That can really add kind of a visible element to the Hill day. You might get asked in the hallway by some other Hill staff or offices you didn't have a chance to meet with, what are you here? What are you advocating for? And then you get the chance to have another little conversation about their priorities. So please consider that to kind of bring some cohesiveness to the group. Be punctual, kind of take a look at the map, know where you're going, try and allow enough time. Don't forget about security, that can take some time. When you sit down for the meeting, confirm the duration with the staff or the member before you begin. Don't assume you have 30 minutes. You might only have 15, and in which case you'll want to know that so you can get through everything in time. Again, exchange contact information and be ready to follow up. Take a business card. You can ask for a photo, and then you can use that in social media, promote the Hill Day, promote what you're out there doing. Just make sure you do ask for photos. Some offices have specific photo policies for meetings, so make that request. And please have a mask on your person. Capitol Hill is back and open to the public, but there are some offices that might request or require that you wear a mask. So please just have one with you in case that happens. Here's just a few additional but kind of similar tips. Express your gratitude, focus on your personal story, be brief and understandable. I would emphasize that. Don't use a lot of medical or research jargon. Make sure you're talking to a lay person. Capitol Hill staff are very, very smart when it comes to the legislative process, politics. When it comes to issues, they're often pretty generalists because they may have to cover a really wide portfolio of issues. So in some cases, you might have someone who's an absolute expert in health policy, but in some cases, you might have someone who's juggling 8 or 10 legislative issues in their portfolio. And so we need to make sure that the language that you use is accessible. Stick to your agenda, make the asks. On the don't side, of course, don't be late. Really important, don't be political or confrontational. don't mention elections, don't mention fundraising, don't mention voting. You're meeting with these members and staff in their government official capacity. So all campaign related things are off the table. So please leave that at home. Again, this goes back to one of the do's, but don't use scientific jargon or technical terms, and don't appear self-serving. It's not about you, it's about the overall environment for dental research and oral health training, but with your personal story thrown in too as an example and emphasized there. So there's a bit of a balance to meet there. You will get a copy of this map when you arrive. I'm sure it's probably difficult to really see on the screen here, but just as an example, this is the Capitol Hill complex with the Capitol there right in the middle. The Capitol, if you have not been there, consists of 3 Senate office buildings on the north side of the Capitol. Those are Russell, Dirksen, and Hart. So if you have a meeting with the Senate office, you'll be in one of those buildings. All 3 of those buildings are connected to one another. So once you enter through security the first time on the Senate side, if you have another Senate meeting right after, you can stay inside. Between Dirksen and Hart, you can travel across, I think, any floor through the hallways, and Dirksen and Russell are connected at the basement. On the House side, the 3 buildings are Rayburn, Longworth, and Cannon. The same theory applies. Once you get in, you're in all 3. They are all connected in the basement as well. You cannot travel through the Capitol to the opposite side, either from House to Senate or from Senate to House, unescorted. So if you do have a meeting in the House side and then you have to get over to the Senate side, you will have to exit, either walk or take a cab to the other side of the Capitol and then enter through security again. So this can all be a really delicate balance looking at your schedule. We're doing our best to make sure people have the right amount of time to get from place to place. But yeah, do keep an eye on that. There is a lot of crowds at the Capitol lately now that they're back open to the Capitol. So do consider showing up to your first meeting even as early as 30 minutes to get through security and make sure you're on time for your meeting. If you do encounter any problems, you will be given my colleague Noah Hamas's contact information when you arrive in DC. He's doing the scheduling and he will be able to help if any issues arise on the day of, if you're running late, if you've gotten, something unexpected has come up, you'll be able to text or call Noah and he can help navigate. He'll be in touch with the staff and can help, resolve any issues that arise. So you'll get that contact information when you're here in DC. Just for your awareness in advance and for any packing, I think a lot of the things listed on the slide are quite obvious. Surely you know that firearms, weapons, and explosives of any kind are prohibited on Capitol Hill, but also large bags and sealed envelopes and packages you're not able to bring. So if you are planning to bring a bag with you to Capitol Hill, it has to meet the size requirements. I understand you'll probably be checking out of the hotel, but we have breakfast hosted by ADEA, and I believe they'll be able to store luggage if needed, or you can leave your luggage at the bell stand at your hotel. I'll let ADEA speak to that specifically in terms of what to do with your luggage, but just wanted to give you a overview of what's permissible and what's not permissible once you get to the Capitol complex. You are able to bring snacks and water into the 3 House office buildings and the 3 Senate office buildings, so that's okay. But snacks and water may not be allowed if you have the opportunity to go to the Capitol Visitor Center. There are different restrictions there. And that's it. And I think we're maybe able, Yehuda can correct me, but to take a few more questions, or we might be over time.
Yeah, we can take some more questions. I just wanted to reiterate, thanks a lot, Meg. That was very helpful reminders and instructions for Capitol Hill. Just a couple of things I want to reiterate, and I think you can stop sharing your screen now, Meg. But, we are presenting a lot of information in a relatively short amount of time, and it can be overwhelming, especially if you haven't done this before. So I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed or intimidated by going to Capitol Hill. Your personal story, what you actually do in your day-to-day job is truly all you really need to know. If you forget everything, it's okay. The asks are going to be on paper in folders that are being handed to the congressional staff. They will have the asks. You will also have the asks, a copy of the asks in front of you. You can read it off the paper if you get nervous and just don't remember even, what we're asking for. And the talking points are really just to supplement your personal story, what you do, and talking about why dental and oral research is so important to you. So don't be intimidated or overwhelmed by all this information. I'll also, again, reiterate, if you have a lab coat that you own, I would, and Tim and I both would, strongly encourage you to bring it. It does make a big visual impact, and I think lends an air of credibility and authenticity to the message that we're delivering. You're obviously not required to. I know some people might work for institutions where potentially they don't want the name of their agency on the Hill, but I think it's pretty bipartisan messaging that we're delivering, and so I would strongly encourage you to bring those and wear those on Capitol Hill on March 30th. Remember to bring your mask. Again, there are some offices that are still requiring them in the offices, so please remember to bring that. And I'll also remind everyone now that the legislative briefing is on March 29th at 3:30 p.m. You should have all received that information. We'll be sending out another an email in about 5 days or so prior to coming to Washington, with a reminder of all of these things and everything you need to know. But please be, if you are in Washington, D.C., and we hope that you will be, on the 29th at 3:30, we would like for you to come, and strongly encourage you to come to the briefing where Dr. Rena D'Souza, the director of the FNIDCR, will be speaking, a prominent HRSA official, as well as we currently have right now Representative Mike Simpson speaking as well at that event. So that's a real opportunity. He's obviously, maybe not obvious, but he is one of the 5 dentists serving in Congress, and he also serves on the Appropriations Committee. So it's a real honor to have him join us on the 29th. We will also review on the 29th some of this messaging and go through the materials again, just as a refresher. And then finally, the slides from today, as well as the recording of this webinar, will be available on our website sometime in the next 24 hours. So if you really found this enthralling and entertaining, you can watch it again, or anyone who missed it can watch it as well on our website. So with that, I'm going to go to Christine, who has her hand up. Just, I'm not sure we can hear you. Just barely. You're probably having the same issue I was having with my. If we're not able to try, maybe you can try one more time. Very faint. I would see if you can work on your audio on your microphone, and if not, please put the question in the chat box.
While we're doing that, let me just jump in to Megan's point concerning your luggage or bags that you'll have when you check out of the hotel. We will be able to accommodate you at ADEA to leave them there if you need be, and come back and get them on your way out of town. However, I would suggest or observe that the bell stand at your hotel may be better, because you're more likely to get a cab quickly at the hotel than you are maybe at our office building. So, but we'll be able to accommodate you.
I think my headphone was on. Can you hear me now?
It's much better. Thank you.
Perfect. Just a few little questions. You said that we have 30 minutes. That's for the whole group, right?
The 30 minutes is the approximate amount of time that is provided by the congressional offices for the meetings. You'll find that probably most meetings will be shorter than that. They give us officially 30 minutes, but most meetings tend to be 15 to 20 minutes or somewhere around there. But it'll also depend on the size of your group and how how supportive they are probably of our message.
And can we bring a computer, laptop, or iPad, or those we cannot bring with?
I think you can bring those to the Hill, Megan. For you.
That's fine. I brought a laptop to the Hill very recently. They just need to be inside a bag that meets the size requirements, and they will have to be screened when you go in through security. So just like you're going in an airplane.
Okay, is there any need for bringing a computer or laptop?
No, you won't need.
Okay. And also, if we have to go from building to building, do we bring our coats, or there's a coat check?
No, you'll have to keep all your belongings with you. So if it's a cold or rainy day, you'll have to keep, coat, umbrella on your person.
So it's advisable that we wear our lab coat, right?
Yes.
Okay. And last thing is comfortable shoes. Is it okay to wear gym shoes?
I'm fine with that.
I think it's fine.
Thank you.
Yeah. Generally the meetings are sitting down. Professional definitely on the top, at least. And I think there's a recognition amongst congressional staff that advocates on the Hill are going from meeting to meeting. Sometimes they'll even point you and help give you directions to your next meeting. Feel free to ask that. They will help you along, especially if you're their constituent and they want to make the experience as positive as possible for you. Other questions? No dumb questions, truly. Anything that you're wondering, we're happy to answer. All right. Well, not seeing any additional questions, I want to thank you all again on behalf of AADOCR, my colleagues. We really appreciate you spending the time today. We really appreciate you coming to Washington, D.C. We're looking forward to seeing you in a week. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to follow up with myself or Tim, and we are happy to answer them. But otherwise, thanks again, and we'll see you in Washington next week.
Thanks, everybody.